For most men at 85, life becomes quiet, routine, and unremarkable. But David Allan Coe was never like most men. He was the outlaw that Nashville could not tame, the songwriter who refused to polish his truth, and the prisoner who turned his scars into songs. Now, after decades of silence, he is speaking louder than ever before. And the story he's telling is not just about music. It is about betrayal, erasure, and revenge against the very institution that tried to bury his name forever. A childhood already lost. David Allan Coe was born on September 6, 1939 in Akron, Ohio, a city better known for factories and rubber than for producing country legends. His beginnings were far from hopeful. By the age of 9, he had already been sent to reform school. What followed was a cycle of confinement, juvenile homes, reformatory schools, and eventually full-fledged prisons. To some, these were just statistics of a troubled child, but to Coe, they were the shaping forces of his defiance. Life never handed him a soft landing. His father remarried, and his stepmother made it clear he was unwanted. The rejection cut deep. She kept his sister, but demanded he be turned over to the courts. From that point forward, Coe's world was one of survival, not nurture. At Star Commonwealth for Boys in Albion, Michigan, he was beaten with paddles until his hands bled. He ran away, stole cars, was caught, and thrown deeper into the system. Yet within those walls, something stirred. Inmates knew him as the one who could sing. He won talent shows inside prison the way Elvis won over audiences outside. Behind bars, he began to write songs, raw, unfiltered, and drenched in pain. Later, he would call them his prison gospel, verses born not of polished Nashville polish, but of desperation and rhythm from concrete cells. He even claimed to have spent time on death row for killing an inmate who tried to assault him. Though that claim has always been disputed, what cannot be denied is that prison carved him into a man unlike any Nashville had ever seen. By the time he was released in the 1960s, he wasn't just another ex-con. He was a storm carrying a guitar, a notebook of lyrics, and a permanent grudge against authority, breaking into Nashville and the rise of an outlaw. When David Allan Coe arrived in Nashville in the late 1960s, he didn't come looking for permission or approval. He drove a hearse, parked it outside the Ryman Auditorium, and lived out of it. To the music industry, he was nothing more than another drifter on the fringe. But he refused to be ignored. He walked the alleys of Music Row, guitar in hand, daring anyone to look away. It didn't take long before his words forced people to notice. In 1973, Tanya Tucker recorded "Would You Lay With Me" in a field of stone, a ballad so haunting, intimate, and raw that it went straight to #1. Suddenly, the industry had to acknowledge the man who wrote it, but what they saw terrified them. Coe wasn't the polished cowboy in clean boots. He was tattooed, long-haired, unpredictable, and unwilling to play their game. While Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson were being celebrated for testing the boundaries of country music, Coe was already past them, writing songs that pushed into territory Nashville didn't dare touch. His early records, Penitentiary Blues in 1969 and later Requiem for a Harlequin, were unlike anything else on the airwaves. They were psychedelic, violent, sometimes disturbing, but they were his truth. And that truth resonated. Bikers, ex-cons, misfits, and wanderers bought his albums and filled his shows. They didn't just see him as a performer, they saw him as one of their own. Coe wasn't giving them entertainment, he was giving them proof that someone was willing to sing the life they lived. But Nashville wanted stars they could polish, package, and control. Coe refused every one of those boxes. He mocked the industry by donning rhinestone suits, a Lone Ranger mask, and calling himself the mysterious rhinestone cowboy. Where others begged for a shot at the Grand Ole Opry, he taunted it. With Long-Haired Redneck in 1976 and You Never Even Called Me by My Name, the latter co-written with Steve Goodman, Coe mocked the very rules of country songwriting, exposing its formulas while making fans laugh and sing along. It was rebellion set to music. And while Jennings, Nelson, and Chris Christopherson earned their place on magazine covers and Opry stages, Coe was carving out a separate kingdom. He didn't need their spotlight. He had already found his own fire, the Blacklist and silent erasure by the Opry. For most country musicians, an invitation to the Grand Ole Opry was the Holy Grail. It was the stage that turned singers into legends, the validation that meant Nashville had accepted you into its circle. But for David Allan Coe, that door was bolted shut from the very beginning. In over 60 years of performing, he was never invited to stand on that stage, not as a guest, not as a member, not even for a single song. The official reasons were never made public, but the whispers grew louder as the years passed. Some pointed to his prison record, others to the Confederate flag guitar that Dimebag Darrell of Pantera had gifted him. Many said it was his controversial lyrics, often crude, sometimes offensive, always unfiltered. But insiders revealed a darker truth. Coe wasn't just overlooked, he was deliberately erased. Former Opry associates told stories of a meeting in the late 1970s where Coe clashed with a powerful figure behind the scenes. Voices were raised, glass was broken, and when it ended, he was told he'd never step on that stage again. Other rumors suggested that he stumbled too close to scandals Nashville wanted buried. An affair involving a rising female star and a married executive, or financial documents hinting at chart rigging and under-the-table payouts that mysteriously disappeared after a studio break-in. Whatever the real story, the result was the same. Coe's name vanished from Opry programs. Radio stations stopped playing his records. Award shows ignored him completely. Booking agents pulled out of contracts without explanation. Even documentaries featuring his peers often pretended he didn't exist. It wasn't just rejection, it was execution without a funeral. And yet Coe's music never stopped. He toured relentlessly, often in rowdy bars, biker rallies, and outlaw festivals where his fans welcomed him as royalty. His concerts were unpredictable, sometimes dangerous, but always real. While Nashville's stars sang clean on television, Coe was pouring out every scar and grudge to audiences who saw through the industry's polish. The establishment wanted him invisible. Instead, he became myth. To the industry, he was a problem. To the people, he was a prophet. And the deeper Nashville buried him, the stronger his legend grew underground. The secrets he kept, and the evidence he saved. By the time David Allan Coe reached his 70s, many assumed the battle was over. Nashville had erased his name from the books, and the Opry had carried on without ever acknowledging him. But Coe was patient. He had lived through reform schools, prisons, and decades on the road. Silence was nothing new. What no one realized was that he had been keeping receipts the entire time. For years, Coe hinted at knowing things that could ruin powerful men. He had told friends about letters, recordings, even photographs that he kept locked away. Most dismissed these stories as the tall tales of an outlaw. But in 2025, at 85 years old, the world finally saw he hadn't been bluffing. In a leaked podcast recording, Coe spoke for nearly 2 hours, calm and deliberate, cigarette in one hand, papers in the other. He didn't rant, he recited. He named executives who blackballed him. He read from a yellowed handwritten letter allegedly penned by a former Opry board member, apologizing for being part of the machine that blacklisted you and referencing a broken deal in 1981. He played a scratchy voice memo in which a now-deceased country star warned him to stay quiet about a bathhouse party involving industry elites or risk ending up in the river like the others. Even more disturbing, Coe described walking backstage in 1977 and witnessing what he called a sickening transaction involving a minor and an Opry official. He admitted he never went to police, fearing he'd be silenced permanently, but he told 2 friends. One of them later died under suspicious circumstances in the early 2000s. For decades, Coe carried that memory like a curse. Skeptics dismissed it all as fantasy, but for others, the pieces aligned too neatly with rumors Nashville had buried for years. And Coe, for the first time, had documents to back it up. He claimed he had kept tapes, contracts, and photos hidden for protection, evidence he never planned to use unless they came for him. But now, with nothing left to lose, he decided to bring it all forward piece by piece. What began as whispers of a bitter outlaw transformed into a storm, and Nashville, which once believed it had buried Coe, was about to be dragged into the light he had been saving for half a century. The interview leak and the firestorm that followed. The interview that unleashed decades of rage wasn't meant to be public. It was filmed quietly on Coe's Tennessee property. Just him, a trusted journalist, and a small crew. What began as a casual conversation soon spiraled into one of the most explosive revelations in country music history. For nearly 2 hours, David Allan Coe unloaded everything he had carried in silence: the names, the letters, the threats, and the betrayals that had shadowed his career. He spoke slowly, without theatrics, his voice calm but heavy with finality. At one point, he leaned into the microphone and whispered, "You want to know why I was banned from the Opry? Because I knew too much. Because I wouldn't play along. Because I caught one of their own doing something that would have destroyed them. And now I'm done protecting them." The room fell silent after those words. There was no music, no editing, just truth hanging in the air like a loaded gun. That video was never meant to escape the room. But once leaked online, there was no stopping it. Within days, TikTok clips of Coe's most shocking lines spread like wildfire. YouTube lit up with reaction videos. Country music forums exploded with debates, fans dissecting every sentence and demanding answers. Younger audiences, many who had only heard of Coe as a fringe outlaw, suddenly wanted to know why his name had been erased for so long. The establishment scrambled. The Opry released a carefully worded statement about honoring tradition and refusing to comment on unverified claims, but silence spoke louder than denial. Country radio ignored the story entirely. Big-name stars, especially longtime Opry members, stayed quiet. Not one tweet, not one public defense. It was as if they were all waiting to see just how much Coe was willing to reveal. Meanwhile, the backlash outside Nashville was electric. Hashtags like #JusticeForCoe and #OpryExposed surged across social media. Fans even gathered outside the Opry House holding signs, "Why not Coe?" and "The truth is outlaw." A few of Coe's old outlaw peers, men who had survived the same backroom wars, broke decades of silence. One songwriter admitted he too had been threatened in the 1980s for questioning Opry politics. A retired sound engineer confessed there was a list of artists never allowed in the building. For the first time, Nashville couldn't bury David Allan Coe. He had outlived them, outlasted them, and now he had outed them. The reckoning and the legacy at 85. By the spring of 2025, the storm that David Allan Coe unleashed had grown larger than even he could have imagined. The Grand Ole Opry, once untouchable in its mystique, was suddenly forced into defense. Public relations teams worked overtime, old staff members were quietly removed, and whispers of internal investigations swirled around Nashville. Yet the damage was already done. For the first time in its century-long history, the Opry was no longer seen as sacred, it was seen as compromised, and Coe, the man they tried to erase, stood at the center of it all. His streaming numbers surged as fans rediscovered songs like The Ride and If That Ain't Country. His concerts, once relegated to fringe biker rallies, began selling out faster than they had in decades. Younger artists spoke openly of his influence, calling him the outlaw who had been telling the truth all along. What the Opry thought would be the end of him had instead revived him. But for Coe, It was never just about revenge. At 85, he knew his days on stage were limited. He wasn't chasing awards or a late career induction. What he wanted was vindication, the chance to show that his absence from the Opry stage was not a matter of talent, but of politics, corruption, and fear. As he put it himself, they tried to kill me off without a funeral. Now I'm writing the eulogy for their image. In many ways, it was poetic. The boy unwanted by his own stepmother, beaten in reform schools and locked away in prisons, had lived long enough to outlast the very machine that tried to silence him. Nashville's gatekeepers, who once held the power to blacklist and bury, were now exposed in the digital age where truth could spread faster than any press release could contain. From his porch in Tennessee, surrounded by guitars, notebooks, and a lifetime of scars, Coe no longer needed the Opry stage to prove his worth. His legacy was already written in the lives of the outcasts who clung to his words, in the underground generations who studied his phrasing, and now, in the reckoning that forced Nashville to look into a mirror it had avoided for decades. The whisper of rejection had finally been drowned out by the roar of his truth. David Allan Coe spent a lifetime being silenced. But in the end, he became the loudest voice of all. Do you think the Opry should finally acknowledge him after everything that's come to light? Or has he already won by exposing them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.